But we go through the table and it's starting to get interesting now.
From what you've seen, who would you say has got the better chance of getting into the playoffs?
Apparently it's going to cost £2 million to fire him.
Yeah.
But the Welsh rugby fans have already started a crowdfunding campaign.
GoFundMe. The Six Nations should have a relegation spot.
We got to talk about Stormers because Dobson came out and said, I'm not worried.
He's a different kind of massive.
You could call him fat.
Bench Opinions. 3 idiots with amateur analysis.
Hello. Goeiedag. I think this is a good one to open with Afrikaans because welcome to Bench Opinions Rugby. If you did not watch the first episode of the week, which was out yesterday, which is called What a Week, welcome. I'm going to give you a quick lowdown again of what's happening. Maxi's not here. It's just because things didn't work out for us to record everything together. But we have now decided to take the hour and 20 minutes plus minus of Bench Opinions every week and break it down into segments so that the people that want to hear us talk shit about everything not related to sport can do so without having to spool through to rugby or through whatever. And then we also have some other segments. This is rugby. Then we're going to have a special football segment as well. And then the last segment we have is called The Leftovers, which is where we discuss all the rest of the sport from around the world, interesting happenings. Exactly. So thank you for tuning in to This is the Rugby episode. Klaus and I will do it together this week, but from next week, we hope we can do all the episodes together. The episodes come out on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And very nice to be with you here and talk about rugby. If you like what you're seeing already and hearing, and you like the general chat, give us a like on that video, subscribe on YouTube, share the channel with whomever. You can also share the channel now with your granny, for example, who might not know anything about sport, but you might want to hear what the youth, or not even the youth, what young people in their 30s think of the world we live in. So there you go. But on to rugby.
On to the Ruggas.
Onto the Raggers. I see Klaus's eyes light up every time the rugby chat comes on.
Well, my eyes are always going to light up more talking about rugby than they are going to be talking about football.
True, fair enough.
But yes, very excited that we are going to commence the first ever rugby segment, individual segment. As Dominic said, unfortunately that Maxi can't be a part of it, but he will be chatting to you about football tomorrow, where I won't be involved. So
precisely.
Let's kick it off. Should we start talking about the URC? As this week we had a bye in the Six Nations. We will talk about that a little bit later in terms of what the upcoming fixtures are in that. But we had an exciting weekend of URC rugby again, which we haven't seen in a little bit. I think the best one to talk about is not the Yuxke derby, but all the teams coming up to the Highveld to play a bit of rugby in Pretoria and in Ellis Park in Joburg.
Yeah, I mean, this tournament continues to produce interesting results. And I think, particularly with the context of the Six Nations now obviously influencing the squads of the teams up north, the inland derby or the local derbies are always very interesting because I think the dynamics between the teams is just so different. There's fewer unknowns. I think it's easier to just to set teams up against each other. You kind of know what's coming at you and you roll a dice and either works or it doesn't. And because of that, even on-form teams can lose at the time. I think the big one obviously is the Bulls Sharks game. The two on-form teams in South Africa. Sharks arguably the most informed team in the competition at the moment, alongside your usual Leinster, for example, and Glasgow as well, who have really come to the fore in the season. But some interesting results. I mean, should we start with the Bulls and Sharks game?
Yeah, let's start with the Sharks and Bulls game. It was a big win for the Sharks coming up to Pretoria against the Bulls. You have quite a lot of Springboks in both of the sides, but especially in the Sharks side. And on top of that, you have a lot of potential Springboks players in the Sharks side that are really coming to the fore. What I thought was really interesting, I forget who said it, but at the end of what's his name? Mavasere. He's a Zimbabwean flanker who plays for the Sharks, and he was saying at the end of the game that the thing that is very important for them is to learn from the Springbok players, but also to close the gap between when the Springboks are with them in the team and when they are not with them in the team.
That's a great point. I think there was a certain level of risk to what the Sharks have done in the last 2 seasons with their investment, and some would argue their over-investment or their over-capitalization of getting new players in. But I think now you're already seeing it work. I mean, they set standards. That's obvious. And they've started the season terribly. But I said to you off camera that it's just incredible how they've just gone on a run now. Yeah. And I think that I don't think you can underestimate that win against the Bulls in Pretoria. Loftus crowds always turn up. It's obviously at altitude as well, so that makes it a bit tougher as well to add. That's a great win, and by 10 points, and it seemed pretty clinical, and there you go. And I think the Sharks and the Bulls are 2 teams that could very much go on and win the thing, which is nice. Yes. And I think as South African rugby, we should be targeting 2 teams in the semi-finals every year, I think. Particularly we have a large number of teams, and I feel like the talent pools are relatively well split amongst the teams. So
at least the top 3 franchises in South Africa, for sure. So that's really good to see. I mean, we can dissect some of the Springbok talk a little bit later, but I'll run through, give us some thoughts on some of the results. The Dragons losing out to Glasgow Warriors. I mentioned that the Warriors are back to their best. Yeah, I think that scoreline 20 to 45 is almost a little bit flattering for the Dragons, because they are by far the lowest on the log table. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but I think they've only got 9 points. I think we've
8 points,
8 points,
12
even
points
less
behind anyone else. Yeah.
So the fact that they even managed to score any sort of points against Glasgow Warriors, granted at home, but nevertheless, Glasgow Warriors I think second in the log table, by quite a margin. So well done to them for being able to do that. I guess the Glasgow Warriors have lost quite a few players to the Scottish international side. The Dragons, as far as I can think, maybe 2 or 3 players that have gone and currently playing for the Welsh side, the likes of like a Rio Dyer and stuff like that. So yeah, I guess the Dragons proving that they can score a couple of tries. But
very interesting also to see how the loss of Six Nations players affect teams very differently. I mean, we can just quickly segue to Edinburgh losing to Zebra.
Yes.
So interesting there, because Edinburgh, I believe Edinburgh are also a team that should be in the conversation to try and get to semis, at least playoffs for sure. And Zebra would have also lost quite a few Italian players, maybe not as much as Benetton, which is maybe the reason why Zebra are able to keep a bigger squad together for coming into a game. Yeah. But for them to beat Edinburgh 22-17 away from home is a pretty shock result. And it's such an interesting dynamic with this competition. Just because, particularly as Southern Hemisphere fans, Super Rugby was always prioritized down in the South, and Rugby Championship was definitely very much split from Super Rugby, or the old Tri-Nations, and then the Four Nations was always split from Super Rugby. So you never really had, there was maybe 1 or 2 games here or there where a couple Springboks maybe were out injured or were being held back or whatever, but generally speaking, they're always at full strength. So that makes it such a difficult competition to navigate, particularly with the context of then the extra 2 European championships that come to it. So that's interesting to see. Connacht beating Cardiff, I think that's not a massive surprise.
No.
Probably could have seen Cardiff maybe spring a surprise, because they're not a bad side, but I think within the context of them, Cardiff obviously having lost quite a few Welsh players, I think.
Not just that, Cardiff, we'll get into this later because that's kind of the elephant in the room, but Cardiff obviously losing their head coach to now go and coach Wales.
Okay, I didn't even know that had happened. All right.
So that's another thing that they had to deal with this week.
Really good win for Munster. I think they haven't been on a great run. For them to beat the Scarlets that convincingly 29-8, a good win. I don't think much can be said there. Benetton, I really love what's happening with Italian rugby, or seems to be happening. Benetton consistently are getting results. Sure, they have a couple of weeks every now and then where they maybe don't step up, but they should beat Ulster, and they did beat Ulster 34-19. I think no questions asked.
I would disagree with you there, because the amount of players that Benetton would have lost to the Six Nations international sides in comparison to the amount of players that Ulster would have lost, I personally thought that Ulster would be able to then go and do it, but I was wrong. You were right.
Yeah. No, look, I think, maybe, obviously with the context of Six Nations, I would have said, I didn't even give it that much thought. I just think on form and particularly at home, Benetton have been really good. I think what helps Benetton is that they do have a lot of non-Six Nations players. and a lot of their star players are also
like a Reno Smith
and
Kumara.
exactly, a couple of the guys there. So I think that helps them as well to keep the core going.
I think it also just goes to show that Benetton has got structures in place that even if they are missing some of their bigger Italian players, that they are still able to perform at. They've got a minimum standard that they meet.
Interesting. Yeah, let's see how that goes. But I love it, and I love that the fact that you're going to see it start. It has started bleeding into Italian national team, which is nice. Big win for the Lions against the Stormers. I didn't see that coming. I think you always back the Lions up in the high felt, particularly with their average performances this season. They've been really good. If you look at their whole season, they had a great start, obviously, and then dipped off a little bit. But to get the jobs done, and also that Stormers getting to 23 is also, I think, flattering to the Stormers. They had a good last 10-15 minutes when the Lions were down to 14 men, but yeah, great win for the Lions.
It's quite an interesting game because most of the points that were scored were due to there being a yellow card involved. So the Stormers, they obviously lost Warren Gatland, who I don't know if you saw that particular move that he did, but essentially at ruck, he made a very good last-ditch attempt at tackling one of the players. And then instead of coming out on his side of the ruck, he came out on the attacking side of the ruck and just kind of like fell into the players that were coming to clean out. So it was quite cynical, and he definitely... I would almost argue that they could have been awarded a penalty try because they were, I think, 5 meters out from the try line. And there was no other defenders in sight, and the Lions players couldn't get to the ball.
Yeah.
But that's not how it went down. It was just a penalty. It was just a yellow card. And from that, there were 2 very impressive tries that were scored. One by Morne van den Berg and one from Henko van Wyk. Both of those tries off the back of Q and Horn, who had an unreal game, finding a lot of space on the outside and really exposing a weakness there, which meant that as soon as Warwick Gatland was no longer part of that defensive line, in terms of being a second line of defense, then they could just run through. It was a one pass inside. Morne van den Berg was always running those like brilliant support lines.
Yeah.
And the second try with Henko van Wyk, he then just needed one more person, which he then passed over to Henko van Wyk, who cut around the back, which was also very impressive.
Yeah. And a big win in the context of the table, but we'll get to that in a second. Ospreys, Leinster is the last game that we can chat about. Leinster getting the win, quite a tight win, to be honest.
Yeah.
22-19, but also I think for them, job done. I mean, if we can segue now into the table, and they're 9 points ahead on 51 points.
Yeah.
I think they've got a home final or home semi-final nailed on. I don't think that's changing. So I think for them also in the context of the table, I think it's try and get the job done. They probably would have even, with the context of the Six Nations going on and everything, probably would have even said, if we lose this game, who cares?
I mean, they've lost so many players currently to the Six Nations. So for them to just sort of get the win and move on, I think they're more than happy to do that. I don't think they're really looking at getting any bonus point tries, which is something that the Lions would have obviously loved to have had.
Yeah. But we go through the table, and it's starting to get interesting now because the time is ticking, and teams trying to get into that top 8.
How many rounds are left? Is it like 8 rounds left?
Well, I think the guys have played 11 games. The teams that have played the most games, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 games. 16.
Yeah.
So that would dictate, though, that you only play 14 games. 7 home, 7 away. That means we only got 3 games left.
Right.
The Lions, however, have 2 games in hand, for example, so they've still got 5 games left.
Yes. But
the time is ticking. This is showtime now, and I would say Leinster and the Warriors are into that top 4 easily. Warriors on 42 points, and then you've got the 2 South African sides, the Sharks and the Bulls on 34 points behind them. Followed closely,
each with a game in hand.
Each with a game in hand, and followed closely by Munster and Cardiff. Which, also looking ahead to the game, Bulls versus Lions, that's coming up this weekend, the lone URC game, one of the catch-up games, massive for both teams.
Yeah.
I would argue almost a season killer could be. I think the Lions have 2 games in hand, which helps them but the 2 games in hand would only get them to 29 points.
Yep.
If they win, no, sorry, more. How many? You get 4 points for a win,
You get
right?
4 points, and then if you get 4 tries, you get another
would get them
bonus
to 31 points, which would not be in the top 4 at the moment. And that would mean they would have to win both games. And I think the Bulls, if they can win this game, they're looking really, really pretty, sitting in 3rd spot. And I think, unfortunately for the Lions, it could be all she wrote. And it's going to be one hell of a UXK derby, that's for sure.
100%. As I said a couple of weeks ago already, for the Lions, a good outcome would be if we can make the playoffs. And eighth position is a very highly contested position, especially considering that everybody's around 27, 24 points, 23 points in that sort of zone. So I think A, that win is very important to us, but B, there's a lot of results that have to outside of our control that also need to go our way.
Yeah, let's see how it turns out. I don't know what the dynamic is between South African teams playing weakened European teams over the next few weeks. That could be something that plays into the hands of the local franchises. I mean, obviously, the Lions would have loved to try and get as high up on the table as possible. You could argue they can lose to the Bulls and still have a pretty decent shot because they'd have a game in hand with the ability to still get to 24 points. To 27 points. And that then gets them sort of up around the Scarlets and Benetton. And if they can maybe play one of those 2 sides, although you would argue you don't want to play one of those 2 sides, you prefer to play a Munster or a Connacht probably.
Or an Ospreys.
Or an Ospreys, yeah.
And I think we are still playing the Ospreys.
Yeah.
We've still got,
So that's an interesting dynamic. But I think... there's also teams down at the bottom there that should not be there. I mean, Edinburgh should be in a top 8, I think, in this URC. If you're looking at their performances and their squads, they should be up there, but they still have a shot, I guess, but it depends how many of those Scottish players come back in time or who comes back. But that a loss to Zebre at home, I always talk about a coach and you're looking at, fixtures leading into a season and going, okay, where do we want to pick up points? They would have probably had that nailed down as a win all day long.
100%. The other thing that we also need to consider is that, yes, these players like you're doing Van der Merwes and your Pierre Skuman and whatnot who are currently playing for the Scottish side, yes, they are out for the next, another 3 weeks, but they could also get injured. The Six Nations is a big tournament. It's just like the Rugby Championship. How often have we seen, your Siya Kolisis, your Ibn Etzebeth go and perform very well for the Springboks, but also put their bodies on the line because those test matches are just that extra bit physical, that extra bit intense. And then by the time they need to come back for their franchises, they actually are pretty broken and need a bit of a break. So, yeah, could be a little bit longer for all of those European sides until they get their star players back. Yeah,
and then we got to talk about Stormers because Dobson came out after the Bulls game last week and said, I'm not worried. I'm pretty comfortable that we're going to get into the playoffs, no problem. The top 4 is probably out of our reach now, but we'll easily make it into those playoffs. I think he was looking at that game against the Lions thinking they're going to win and then have to win. But it's bleak. It is really bleak because it's going to be tough for them to get out of that that basement essentially that they're in, stuck, wedged between the Ospreys and Ulster on 23 points.
They've got quite a few players that are missing. Your Joseph Dwebers, your Sasha Feinberg, Ngomazulu, Marnie Libok is missing. So they've got quite a few key players that are not part of the squad. But you would think that they would be able to at least score some sort of points. I don't think that they're currently struggling purely based on personnel. I believe that there's some maybe not tactical, but there's something not going right in training because they're fumbling the ball too often. The amount of handling errors they had in the game against the Lions was pretty bad, and that's what really cost them.
Yeah, and particularly as a coach, I mean, the poor Dobson, they kept sort of panning to him in the commentator's box. I'm not the commentator box, the coach's box during the game on Saturday. And the man looked cut, a beleaguered figure. And also again there, you really think to yourself as a coach, I can't catch the ball for them. I can't. Basics are basics, and I think particularly in this world of rugby that we're in, and you look at France, for example, against England, what let them down at the end of the day was basics. And I think it's so easy to get into spaces of focusing on all these elaborate tactics and everything, but a coach can't get the player to catch the ball. And he, as I said, he cut a really beleaguered figure, and I think. I just find it very interesting that he made those comments last week, given the situation, and maybe just shows that he might not really quite have grasped the reality of where the Stormers are at the moment and how they can get into that. And Mike, I know what Maxie's going to say tomorrow when I see him. He's going to be like, I can't believe you bashed my beloved Stormers like that, or next week. But it's true. And of course, injuries play a role, but it's an interesting thing for me for a coach to come out and be so brazen about where his team's at, and then get the thumb to be honest, because as I said, Ruiz scored a try in the 78th minute to get them to 23, and it was converted as well. So, they really got a bit of a walloping.
Considering where both of those teams are on the log, you got your Stormers at 23, you got your Lions at 23. Granted, the Lions have a game in hand, and now, without even looking at who they have to play against, from what you've seen, who would you say has got the better chance of getting into the playoffs? Or do you believe that neither of them can get into the playoffs?
I'm a firm believer in momentum when it comes to sport, and I think you have to peak at the right time. I think that's why if you look at any tournament sports, rugby, football as well, such an interesting way to navigate it, because if you're not peaking at the right times, if your momentum's not positioned properly, you're going to struggle in tournaments. And we've seen that over the years in football tournaments, rugby tournaments, also with teams surprising. Look at France. They were amazing at it in rugby for years, because how many finals have France played in rugby, and how many times have they gotten to the semi-finals in rugby? Even though they haven't always had the best sides, they just had this ability to kind of get their backs up and grow into tournaments with rugby. And I think because of that, I think the Stormers are in big trouble. I think momentum's not on their side. I think Dobson was definitely banking on them finally showing probably what he believes they can do, and growing into this team that can then go on to win the URC, which they've done before. I'm not saying I don't think this year would have been their year, but at least get into those playoffs and maybe, again, semi-final away from home against Warriors, for example, you probably could try and turn it on and get the result. And I think that's what he would have been hoping for. And they've honestly they've dropped the ball on that. And now I think if you look at the Lions after beating the Stormers like that, I also think the call-up of some of these players, and we'll get into that, the call-up of some of these Lions players into the Springbok setup for the alignment camp now is also going to boost their confidence massively. I think moving Nohamba on, strangely, is a very good decision. And I think because he needed a fresh start, and I think they were trying to carry him for a while after the death of one of his family members. I think it was his dad, right?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, but one of his family members. Sometimes those kind of things just help a team grow into a season, and that's why I think if you were to ask me now, I think the Lions have the better chance. But if I wouldn't bet on them making it. I think it might be a stretch too far.
The Lions.
Yeah. For me, they have to beat the Bulls this weekend.
And as much as it pains me to say it, I don't see them beating the Bulls this weekend. The thing with the Lions is they have got an incredible back line, and the problem that they tend to face is that they don't have as much of a forward pack that can bully guys around. So they have pretty athletic forwards, which is, I find, always very entertaining. But if they get into a bit of a push and pull situation, where you need to build a bit of a platform so that you can really unleash your backline, they just don't seem to have that grit and that way. I mean, you got guys like Nklabakanya, who is absolutely amazing, and can obviously throw his weight around because he has 145 kilograms of it. But generally speaking, your Frankie Horns, your Ruan Fenter, he's a bit of a beefcake, so he can also throw around. But even your Yaku Fasahi, he comes on second half as a hooker. He's more of one of those lean running hookers. Yeah. And so if you come up against a France Mahaba, I mean, to be fair, the Lions did really well in holding their own in that scrum, but still coming up against France Mahaba, if you don't have the weight to match another forward pack, you're really going to struggle to get sort of dominance for your backline to then fire off of. But when they do fire,
Yeah.
your Morne van der Berg is distributing to your Henko van Veeks, your Francois Lowe's, your Kieran Horns, and your Edolf van der Merwes, and they run riot.
Yeah.
Which is amazing to see. But can they do it against bigger teams? Struggle.
There's a couple of the thing. My sort of summation of the Bulls this year is that there have been days where they've just not showed up. There's been a few results where it just seems like they haven't showed up. And some of those are due to them traveling with lesser squads, sure. But a lot of that is also just, I think Jake White's style is quite interesting. I think he has this ability to coach really clinical, focused, driven teams that just get results. But he also has this ability, I think, sometimes to outfox himself in that he waxes lyrical about this not being our competition and I've got to manage squads and blah, blah, blah. And I sometimes wonder if he doesn't get into his own players' heads, where they're standing there going, hold on, so do we want to win this game or is this important? Or, that's kind of my summation of it as someone that's not in the thick of it, of course. And that's what makes it interesting for me, because I think if the Lions can get it, the Lions do have the ability to hurt you. And if the Bulls happen maybe for 1 second not to show up on the weekend, and the Lions get ahead, I think they could do the job. But I worry for the Lions that Jake White is just so good at getting the job done with the side. And if you then you can break it down. We talk about all this complex coaching and all these dynamics. At the end of the day, if you just look at the amount of Springboks and potential Springboks in the Bulls side and compare it to the Lions side, and they just are a group of better players.
Yeah.
And I think that could just get it across the line. But very interesting. If you had to pick a favorite at the moment, it has to be Leinster, surely.
In terms of winning the entire championship. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think Leinster's just, the players that they've got are phenomenal. The structures that they've got are also incredible, considering the fact that they lost most of their players to the Six Nations internationals, and they still just are able to fire on all cylinders, not only in this competition, but also in the Heineken, is it still called Heineken Champions Cup?
No, it's
European Champion Cup. They've got phenomenal structures in place, and then their game strategy just works.
And then ingenious, just smart moves to get Barrett in to kind of supplement the side when you're going to be weakened. He's such a superstar, that guy. And so, I think they're definitely favorites. I wouldn't be surprised if that's top four stays the top four, personally, on the balance of play. So Leinster, Glasgow Bulls and Sharks getting into those semi-finals.
Yeah.
Just because if you look at, even if you just look at it, it does seem like there's a gulf in class. Obviously Munster can turn up on their day, and they're a massive team as well. So I think don't count them out. But I think other than that, I think it's quite set already.
Look, the Bulls and the Sharks both have a game in hand.
Yeah.
As we've just said, and the Bulls, as we've also unfortunately just had to admit, will most likely win this next game. So that will put them up at least 38 points, if not even 39. I don't know who the Sharks play against next, but with their current form and the way that they're firing, you would expect them to also get potentially a win. And that already then gives you a 7 or 8 point gap between themselves and Munster. So it looks like that top four is probably going to be the top four. I would have to agree with you on that. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and then let's see with the whole momentum chat, because on the one hand, you I think it's probably going to split opinion about momentum looking at the Six Nations players coming back in, because on the one hand, you can either go, fuck, we really needed these guys back if you're an Edinburgh or someone that's really struggled without them in the squad. Or you could look at, other teams like a Benetton. I'm not saying Benetton's going to necessarily be in the mix sort of to win the whole URC. They're not. But it'll be interesting to see how momentum works, and if the South African teams just go from strength to strength and therefore have momentum on their side, or if these big internationals coming back for the final stretch of the tournament actually help the sides in the Northern Hemisphere. We'll see what happens.
It's definitely going to be interesting to see in the latter stages of this tournament how it all pans out. But something that might give players from South Africa more motivation is the Springbok alignment camp that just happened, is just about to happen. There's a whole bunch of players, I think 60 players that were invited to this alignment camp, of which there were a number of players who are uncapped that are coming into the fold that we've also spoken about in the past. And I can't remember how many forwards and how many backs there are, but there was something like 16 players that are uncapped that have been invited. Should we run through some of the forwards and then we'll move over to or do you just want to talk about the backs because it's more exciting?
No, I think let's chat through it. I think generally first impressions is the Rassie machine keeps ticking. That's kind of my feeling of it, and I don't want to go on about this for too long because I think it's been said so many times. But when I look back at Alistair Coetzee and I look back at Heineke Meyer and them picking squads, because at the time they weren't as advanced, I would say, as clinical as Rassie is with the alignment camps and the setups and the funnels that he creates for Springboks. There was always massive shock inclusions. And I feel like that's kind of gone now. And I'm talking about shock inclusions for touring squads, so final squads, not even alignment squads. And you look at the set of players that have been chosen here within the alignment camp, and you look at this list and you go, cool, on merit, these are the dudes. These are the guys. And I think we've spoken about it before in the podcast, this pure merit-based approach that Rassie has, coupled with his man management and his ability to build a story and a goal and values. It's just incredible. And I that's what I love about it. Because you look at this list and you're like, these are the guys. He said, put your hands up. You've put your hands up and now you're into the alignment camp. Now show me what you got. And I think that's really, really, how do you say it? It's just really, it's good to see that as a Springbok fan.
Yeah. I've actually been rewatching the Chasing the Sun, the first season, not the second, and they were talking about everything from Siya Kolisi being named the first black. I was about to say president, but first black, maybe one day be a president, first black captain, and they were also talking about how important that was for the black players that were in the squad at the time. You know, your Mbongi Munambi, your Trevor, all these kind of guys. Makazulu Mapimpi, Lukanya, and in terms of how motivational that was. But what they also spoke about, for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, is that Rassie was very open about talking about merit-based. He said, first we need to start winning, then we go after transformation. Because once we're a winning team, then whatever we talk about will motivate people to want to play the game, want to be a part of the system.
Yeah.
And if we start winning and we talk about transformation, it's like little kids of all colors are going to want to play. Yeah. And that's what he's shown over the last, how long has he been Springbok coach now? Since 2018, I think. So it's like going on 7 years now. Now you look at the players coming through and it, like, as you said, it's all merit-based, and you look at the names and you're like, it's pretty transformed in comparison to what it used to be, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think, again, it's without going on and on about how good Rassie is, because I think everyone knows how good he is. It just is the consistency, just the consistency and just the rationale is just insane, I find. In a world that's so clouded by, we spoke about it now as well through you can easily sort of talk about all the coaching approaches and everything at the end of the day. But, we're talking about sport here and what happens on the field and performance-based, a performance-based system. Yeah. And I think that's what's important to focus on. But yeah, let's go through some of the individuals. I think we can start with some of the forwards. Maybe just pick out a couple of names. I think going through everyone is a bit of overkill. Evan Roosback in, which is a player that I really like. Yeah. But I've said it before. I think it's, at least privately, I think it's time. It will eventually get to the phase where he either has to step up, otherwise I see him moving on within the Springbok setup. I don't know how you feel about him. I think he had a decent game against the Lions. He scored a try on the weekend, and he can do so much damage when he's got the ball in his hand.
Look, it's not for nothing that they call him the Mini Thor. Obviously, the name that was coined for Dwayne Vermeulen, who in Springbok history will and has gone down as, you know, one of the greats. And so if you've got a guy like Evan Roos who's in the same ilk, you would hope that he sort of can meet that kind of high standard that we've set for our number 8s. The only problem with Evan Roos is that he's obviously been plagued with a couple of injuries, so he's been out of the game on and off for a while. And the other thing that I tend to struggle with him in particular is he's so passionate and that sometimes boils over to a bit of hot-headedness, which then, you know, creates penalties that go against you or concedes penalties. So he needs to try and get that under control, and I think then you have a better shot at being a Springbok and being able to hold that jersey for himself. But he's got some stiff competition. I mean, if you look at somebody from the Lions, for example, who I think is an incredible player and a very different style of player, is somebody like Frankie Horn, who has been man of the match too many times to count this season alone, never mind last season.
One of our, is it Jasper Wiese that got really badly injured recently?
Yeah.
As soon as that happened, I was like, this is Evan Roos's one chance. Because I felt that with Jasper Wiese, for example, in the beginning, he was obviously a very accomplished 8, but I always felt lacked that sort of edge in the beginning, right in the beginning of his Springbok career. Really good. And now over the years, he's just become an absolute monster. And I really think cemented his, I think if he hadn't gotten injured now, I don't think anyone would argue with him starting at 8 for the foreseeable future. But that's why I think it's even more important for Roos and also for Springbok Rugby that we find someone that can kind of step into his boots. And again, it's such a pleasure to have someone like Evan Roos, but Frankie Horn is just a completely different type of eighth man. But interesting to see. But now that we're on the Lions and we spoke about how this might lift them, and again, I love it because a lot of the times in previous squads under previous coaches, I felt like there was a very big focus on the Bulls, Stormers, and the Sharks in their selection. And here you see, I think the right amount of Lions have been picked based on what they've been done. And I can't say much to Renzo Duplessis, but Frankie Horn, Nhlabakanye, and Ruan Venter have had great seasons. Fantastic seasons. I think also in Nhlabakanye, there was news a couple of weeks ago that he had a massive offer from French Rugby to go to Toulouse, I think it was. Turned it down, and it must have been after consultation with Rassie, and Rassie saying, listen, you're going to get into the alignment camp. Wait a second. Let's keep you here. Let's see what you can do. So that's really great to see as well. And I mean, you're a big fan of his, and I think you've watched way more of him. Do you think, look, for anyone who doesn't know Nhlabakanye, the man weighs 140 kilograms. He's
ginormous.
He's massive, and he's just not what you would call the spitting image of an athlete.
No.
And
he's a different kind of massive. It's not like a Polynesian big bone kind of guy.
Well, I think you could call him fat.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's fair to call him fat.
Yeah. But he moves his body around a park, and he goes he'll go full 60 minutes, no questions asked. And it's just because of his size, it takes 2 to 3 players to bring him down, which obviously causes massive gaps elsewhere in your defensive line. Yeah. And having a player like that is quite a weapon.
Particularly in the context of the bomb squad and the splits on the bench usually, because for the Springboks, I don't think he'll have to very often do more than 50 minutes, no. And or 30 minutes coming on. So I think that's probably what attracts Rassie to him as well. And knowing Rassie and his ability to get even more out of players in the Springbok jersey, who knows where the ceiling is for him. So that's really good to see.
I mean, imagine having Frans Malherbe start and then bringing him on for 30 minutes. You've got tired bodies who now need to try and tackle this behemoth. And
hopefully, I mean, I don't think there's been too much criticism of his scrummaging, but the chances are that his scrumming is probably just going to get even better.
His scrumming is, I mean, he was currently scrumming against Stormers, which is, was it Ali Vermaak and Frans Malherbe on the other side. So, the Lions were holding their own against that scrum.
Yeah, very exciting to see. I'd love that. I also love the other storyline of players like that. There's always a few of them that pop up, like your Sebastian Chabals and your they're just a little bit different, and I think that's really cool. Also for the interest and the excitement in the game.
And it's just important that we have these guys on the field because, there's more and more talk of getting the game to be more fluid and moving a lot more. And sometimes I feel like the rules are going more towards rugby league than staying with rugby union. And the scrum is just a really important part of this game. And if you don't have the scrum, you don't have players like in Klapakanya. And so we want to keep those guys on the field.
And that position is, there's with Kitshoff out, that position definitely is something, and we pride ourselves on our front row. So it'll be good to find a quick replacement. Hopefully he is it, I guess.
Kitshoff was usually a loose head.
Okay.
He's a tight head.
Okay.
So he would be with France.
Okay. Yeah. Then we got Gumede. I'm quite excited by Gumede purely because I think the hooker positions are also something that we really need to look at because Mbonambi's getting on in years. Marks, I don't know if he can stay fit. He probably can get to the next World Cup. But I think we've also always had really good hookers. And I think having someone step up hopefully sooner rather than later will be good for competition.
What's your view on Andre Hugo Venter coming into the fold? He's obviously also very famous for dating Rassie Rasmus's daughter.
Yeah, I don't think that rumor is going to go away. Let's see. I mean, at the end of the day, again, I have full faith that if he shows what he's got and he's good enough, he'll get into the side on merit. And if not, he doesn't. It's definitely an interesting side story that he's dating one of Rassie's daughters. But I like to think that we're safe. I don't think it's for family reasons that he's been picked.
I think there's enough structures in place to mitigate that, even if there were a bit of
exactly. Cameron Hanekom, someone that we've spoken about a lot. He's going to have a big year, I think. Hopefully, he comes to the fore.
Obviously, not a debutant because he played last year to secure his loyalty to South Africa and not to Wales.
Yeah,
not that I see him wanting to go to Wales anyway, especially under the current situation. But
yeah. Then someone like Aka van der Merwe coming back into the fold. Interesting. Also, again, just purely on merit. He's had a great season. He had a really good game.
Great hooker. Very athletic.
Yeah, fantastic player.
Well, they call him the Angry Warthog.
Yeah, exactly. It's a good description. And then some of the usual names in there as well. We haven't sort of included in our list here that we're reading off all the big names, obviously.
I think a lucid prop that's going to be really interesting is Nietling Forshia. I think he's one of the most athletic props I've ever seen. Also very, very tall, which is not common for props.
Yeah.
Usually besides Francois Mahabe, they're usually a little bit shorter and stockier. He's more of like a long athletic type prop. So that he's going to be interesting and also offer Rassie a different kind of prop.
Yeah. But it just this alignment camp just proves we're so stacked in the forward positions, and we always are, and we always have such a luxury of choice. So let's see who Rassie picks. Because Rassie also, his squads, his alignment camp squads, usually are pretty easy to understand. But then the next phase sometimes tends to surprise the guys he kind of picks out coming into the next sort of series that we'll have. I think this year will be more experimental than most because of the opposition we're facing.
Yeah.
We're playing lesser sides, so it's an opportunity to kind of...
We're playing against Georgia. We're playing against, an up-and-coming Italy. Yeah. Which is...
At home, though.
At home, yeah.
Yeah.
We're playing Argentina in London, which Maxi spoke about that last time.
Money talks.
Not really that impressed about it.
Yeah. But money talks. Do we want to go through some of the backs? Because
let's go through some of the backs.
Because I've spoken at length about our need to find a good center pairing. And some of the guys starting to really put their hands up. You've got Jorenzo Julius is the most exciting, I find. I think he's someone that also, unfortunately, though, can let you down on some days as much as he can excite you on others. But he's still young. I think, 23, something like that.
Didn't he play in the under-19s just last year or 2 years ago?
Could be, yeah. Then he's not much older than 20 years old.
Yeah, he's still got a long
he's phenomenal. Way. And then I look at a name like Henku van Wyk, who's been knocking on the door for a long time. Good to see them in there, and hopefully they can get some playing time this year.
Henku van Wyk now on the weekend played an incredible game of rugby. So he's great on attack, but he's also a mean guy on defense. He tends to have the style that when he grabs somebody, he throws himself around that pivot point and like whips them onto the ground instead of like tackling them and trying to push them back, which he can also do. But he's more of a stocky, short kind of center, so not a tall guy like an Ethan Hooker or like Lukhanyo Speaking of Ethan Hooker, he's not a hooker. he plays outside center and also wing. Incredibly fast, very talented. And you have him playing together with Julius Lorenzo and Lukhanyo and Andre Esterhuizen. So the amount that those two players, Julius and Ethan, will be able to learn from a Springbok combination in Andre and Lukhanyo is, that will translate in improving their game, and then also understanding the Springbok setup once they get that nod. So I think in terms of inside and outside centers, we're pretty well equipped to have a good future.
Talk me through David Creel, because I also feel like there are a lot of cracks in our number 10 position, in our fly half position at the Springboks. And I say that because of Mani's kicking troubles, which is not something we have to go through again. Also Sasha Feinberg-Ngomozulu's injury problems. I worry if he can stay fit, because the signs have not been good so far. He tends to get a lot of niggles all the time, so I hope that he can come back stronger and stay fit. But then you've got Andre Pollard, who could probably get to the next World Cup, but not in a starting position. I think he'd be someone that would be there for experience and his kicking, in my opinion.
It could be like a Johnny Sexton and
maybe. But David Creel for me is, first of all, he's a good kicker. Which is great. And I don't think he's been playing much in the 10 though for the Bulls, has he? He's playing as a center.
Inside center, yeah.
I wonder if he's not an option, at least to possibly slot into 10 as a sort of, because Rassie loves these utility players.
Yeah.
I mean, he's an absolute monster at almost 2 meters tall, and he's a behemoth. Or if he's not someone who really puts his hand up for that inside center role, and he's a really good kicker, and that solves our issues at 10. What are your feelings on that?
Personally, I can't remember if I've ever seen him play at 10. I know he's played at 15 before. But yeah, as you said, predominantly he plays at inside center, but his kicking is great. And that obviously offers you a second kicking option, especially when you have the likes of Imani Libok on the field. I just don't see him being better than an Andre Esterhuizen, who can also kick. I also don't see him being better than the younger guys coming through, like an Ethan Hooker and a Julius Lorenzo. Obviously, you don't have the kicking option through those guys, or Henko van Wyk. But I think for general play, they are the better players.
Okay. I love that. It sounds weird, but I love that he exists though, for that very reason. David Creel. Yeah. He's only 25 years old. So he's got a lot of rugby left in him. And I like that. I like that he's, it asks the right questions. Having him be able to kick really well. So let's see how that kind of turns out, and how Rassie uses that to kind of breathe. Because I think Rassie also, he's definitely, I think he loves kind of getting players to breathe each other down each other's necks to get the best out of them.
I was just about to go into that. It's great competition within the squad. So everybody's being kept honest and having to keep on pushing, right? So that's what you want.
And then Embrose Papier, I mean, great to see him back. He's someone that really thrived under Rassie early on as a youngster, and then kind of disappeared. I think he got a bad injury at some point and then disappeared out the fold. But he's had a great season for the Bulls.
Amazing season, yeah.
So they're also, with people like Faf possibly not playing again, and someone like Kobus Weinach not being young enough to get to the next World Cup, it's good to see another really good number 9 come through. In a similar ilk to Grant Williams to a certain degree, I feel like they've both got electric pace. They're really quick, really exciting. I think Grant is a cut above, but nice to see.
I mean, if you consider Kobus Weinach and Faf de Klerk potentially not making the next World Cup, whether that be due to retirement or just not being good enough or quick enough, you've got Grant Williams and Jaden Hendricks at the Sharks, right? Jaden, I don't personally like.
I'm not a big fan either.
But no. Jordan, I think, is great. But Jaden is, I just don't see him as being good enough for the Springboks, personally. You've got Krappies, Morne van den Berg, who's already played for the Springboks before. is in the alignment camp again, so there's obviously trust in him.
And offers something different as well. I feel like he's more of a
fuff.
Fuff. Not near as good because Farid Pur was probably one of the best not scrummers ever, but he offers that sort of, he's just as dynamic and just as energetic, but yeah, in a more controlled fashion, if that makes sense. Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, great option as well. Yeah.
And then you got Ambrose as your fourth guy, which is currently what we have. You know, we've got Kobus, Faf, Jaden, and Grant. So if you can replace those Faf and Kobus with the next two guys coming through, I think Ambrose and Morne van Berg are
good guys.
Good guys. I know he's got Paul de Vet also in alignment camp. Or was that the mistake from what we were reading earlier on?
No. That he's
I think Paul de Vet. Oh yeah, Paul de Vet is also in the alignment camp. I don't see him as being nearly as good as a Ambrose Papier or a Morne van Berg, but would definitely be just another option. You never know what happens with injuries and whatnot. So you've got that. Something that I would like to talk about is Kieran Horn. We've obviously got Willie, who's been playing as our main 15, and you've got Apelele Fassi, who's been coming through the system and has been playing for not only incredibly well for the Sharks, but he's also been playing incredibly well for the Springboks. Do you think somebody like Kieran Horn can be pushing Apelele Fassi, or do you think he's not there yet?
I think anyone who's chosen for this alignment camp is seen as a realistic option in the position that they're in. I don't think anyone gets taken unless there is this sense of let's bring people in to create competition in positions. So my straight up answer there would be yes, 100%. And I think with Apelele, the problem with Apelele is if he's on, he's the best there is, but he tends to make bad mistakes. It's something that's gotten better with time, and I think that's why he's become a bona fide Springbok now, because he's been able to kink out these massive mistakes or the bad games that he would have. But Apelele also struggles at times for staying fit, so that's a question mark as well. And I think if Kieran Horn can continue his form for the Lions, and you must also remember, these guys that are putting on these performances in a Lions setup are doing so off the back of a weakened squad. Compared to all the other franchises. It just has to be said like that. I think this season you can argue with all the injuries they've had, the Stormers and the Lions are having similar issues.
Right.
But I would say generally, if you're performing at that level for the Lions, you're really turning it on, and it's really a factor of personal performance as opposed to only being part of a winning team. Maxi again is going to roll his eyes at this because we're praising the Lions, but I think because of that, I see big potential for Lions players growing into the Springbok jersey.
Right.
And I don't see why they can't, Kieran can't. I mean, I think 15 is one of those positions that's probably the least etched in stone for me.
Right.
Okay. And yeah, so that's why I would say, why not?
Something you lose with Kieran is, I don't think he's as fast as someone like Apelele Fassi, and Apelele Fassi has also played on the wing before, whereas Kieran, I personally not seen him play on the wing for anybody, let alone the Lions. So that's something that you'd lose, especially when you consider that Rassie likes to go for a 6-2 split, sometimes even a 7-1 split, meaning that you don't really have that much backup on the bench. And I think a position like a fullback is something where they hope that they would have a little bit more versatility just to be able to move them around. But the thing that you gain through somebody like Kieran Horn is he's got an incredible boot. In terms of open play and kicking for touch, I think he can kick off both feet. Maybe not as good off the other one, the less dominant foot. But when he kicks it a country mile. And that's something that I think would pip him over Apelele Fassi in that regard.
I think if you look at the history of Rassie and the fullbacks that he has chosen, I think even Willie, he was a specialist fullback. I mean, towards the end now, they've started moving him around a little bit, but he was a specialist fullback. So I don't see why Kieran can't come in and be a specialist fullback.
Well, Willie used to play a wing back at the beginning of his Springbok career. So
but I think if you look at under the winning teams of the 2 World Cup winning sides,
Right.
Villy was a specialist fullback, and that's where he played. And that's why I don't see an issue in Kewen coming on. And I think then you look at someone like a David Creel becomes more attractive to Rassie to have on the bench, because you've got someone who can kick, but someone who can play at inside center and fullback, and who knows, after the first alignment camp you might see him at 10. I don't know, but I think that's maybe something also. I mean, I think again there the permutations are so diverse, and that's again why these alignment camps and the way players are selected is so interesting, and I think is one of the big reasons why the Springboks do so well with Rassie and the coaching setup, is because all of these players, we've spoken about 2-3 players here in a multitude of combinations, and it's almost difficult to choose how you put them on that pitch, because it's hard to tell what they're better or worse at, which is a good problem to have. So
these alignment camps are going to be very interesting. As Dominic rightly said, to steal a term from another sport, silly season will be the second alignment camp once they start nailing down their final group of players that they will use throughout the year. Maybe he goes and uses 42 players in a season again, and does a bit of experimenting. But that's something that we will follow over the next year. I think it's time to move over to the big elephant.
Yeah, speaking of coaches,
in the room. An international coach got fired last week.
Yeah.
We had spoken about his imminent removal a couple of times, but didn't think it was going to happen in the middle of a tournament.
Yeah.
Gatland's gone.
Gatland's gone. The right decision, in my opinion. I think it was just too much. I think that Italy game, if they'd won it, I think it would have just put a plaster on a gaping wound. But I think that was it. I think they didn't really have a chance against it. It wasn't. They didn't lose in the last minute. It wasn't a tight game. Italy kind of managed and when you're being managed like that by an Italy side as Wales, I think you have to take a really hard look at yourself in the mirror. And I think it was the right decision. Apparently, it's going to cost £2 million to fire him.
Yeah,
but the Welsh rugby fans have already started a crowdfunding campaign.
GoFundMe.
And which actually I find a very interesting concept generally in sports.
Yeah.
I would love to see that more in sports. Fans taking control back of their clubs and their teams.
Do you think that at that point, I know this sounds unfair, do you think at that point a guy like Warren Gatland should just be like, guys, it's okay. Let's call it an even million and go our separate ways? Yeah,
I think so. But I think, unfortunately, Warren Gatland, don't forget he stayed far too long. So that's the first reason where I think, but I think the issue with someone like Warren Gatland is that I think he'll look back, and I think everyone will look back at what he has done for Welsh rugby.
Of course.
And be like, you know what, it is, and you know what, contracts are contracts. And the same way they protected themselves, the Welsh Federation, he's also protected. Sure. And vice versa. So I think, but the right decision. I think. What is your initial thought on it?
Absolutely, no. He's just been struggling to get that group to fire on all cylinders. Look, granted, he has not got the best pool of players to pick from in the first place, and there's some deeper problems at Welsh Rugby than the coach. He is still a phenomenal coach, and he has done amazing things in the past. Is he maybe beyond his time? Potentially. But I think the structures in Welsh rugby are more of an issue than the head coach of the Welsh national team. Because you can't have Cardiff, Scarlets, Dragons, and the other team that I'm blanking on. What are they called?
Ospreys.
You can't have them all underperforming and then expect great things from the national team.
You say that, but you look at the table, and Scarlets and Cardiff are, at 5th and 6th and 7th in the table, which means they have a good opportunity to get into the playoffs. And you look at the Irish teams; 2 of the Irish teams are close to out of the running to get into the playoffs, in Connacht and Ulster. So let's put it this way: for this, there's 2 Welsh teams ahead of 2 of the Irish teams, which I can't really say why that is and how that is, and obviously Leinster and Munster are incredible teams. But what I am going to say is, you mentioned that they picked Cardiff's manager, Cardiff's coach, as the successor to Warren Gatland.
Interim.
Interesting.
Interim.
Okay. I would have given them A+ if it weren't interim and if it were permanent. Interim thing is a bit weird to me, but okay. And the reason,
it might change, but for now they've.
The reason
they've
I would give them A+ is I think that's the best thing you could have done, because you're bringing someone from within who works with these players, and in my opinion gets them to overperform in the URC. For Cardiff to be 5th in the URC or 6th in the URC is pretty impressive, I find. And you also avoid this thing again, because there was talk of possibly the Glasgow Warriors coach, the South African, Franco
Smith.
There was talk of possibly O'Gara as well, which for me would have been wrong, because I think A, you're paying a lot of money for them because they're big name coaches. You got to draw them, and B, they're going to be expected to perform from the word go. And I think Welsh Rugby now needs to look at not this World Cup, the next one, as where we're trying to get to. And I think bringing someone through from within your own ranks who knows the players, who's currently coaching a Cardiff side very well, in my opinion, in the URC, to get into a playoff spot, I think that's the way to go.
I think in terms of picking a coach is, I've got to agree with you that they picked the right kind of coach. I don't see them getting anybody better, because I don't know who wants to take on that job. Because as I said, I think the structural issues at Welsh Rugby are the main issue. So who wants to take on a job where they think they're most probably going to fail anyway? Take him for now, see how things go. Maybe he becomes the permanent head coach. Maybe they offer that position to him.
Yeah. I think no one dislikes Welsh Rugby and the Welsh team and the Welsh fans. So I think for World Rugby, it's good that they stay competitive. I think the Welsh Rugby's decline has asked a lot of questions and posed a lot of questions to World Rugby as to how do they prevent declines like this for national teams, but also what is the plan if the top tier nations, any top tier nation, falls off the face of the earth the way the Welsh have, I actually watched a little bit of the European Rugby Championship. I think it's called a European something, but that's Germany, Romania, Switzerland, and Georgia. And the level of rugby is pretty good, but Georgia are streaks ahead.
Sure.
And, and I would love to see a plan for how do you get a team, how do you reward dedication to the game of rugby within a nation like Georgia?
That's a great topic that you broach on, because I wanted to just ask you if you believe the Six Nations should have a relegation spot, and if the lower tier should have a promotion spot.
I think so, and I think there's two reasons, because there's going to be more drama. The product of the Six Nations will become more exciting at the bottom end of the competition, because that's the one thing I've never liked about the Six Nations, is that you have 3 sides battling it out, and then the other 3 are trying not to have the wooden spoon. Throw in the context of being relegated, makes it really exciting. If Italy and Wales, that game is for who gets relegated or not, I'm telling you now, the interest will peak and people will get really passionate. Same thing can be said for the lower division. What is the carrot that's dangled in front of the teams? If you're a German semi-professional rugby player and the pinnacle for you is a 4-week tournament in Romania, how are you? There's going to be a very low ceiling as to how that competition can help grow the game.
Yeah.
And I think if you incentivize it by saying, hey, if we win this thing, we're into the Six Nations and it's bona fide professional rugby, you're going to see a different set of wheels in motion within those unions as well, because the money talks both for the players but also the unions, and that money gets funneled down into how do we develop the game. And we've been to some amateur rugby here in Berlin, and the level is really surprisingly pretty good. Yeah. And 200 fans come out to watch the game, So I think my gut instinct is yes. Maxi did once mention, though, that a relegation spot might completely kill off countries like Wales. That's a fear. But I think if they're being relegated into something that is supported, like a second-tier competition, then I would say it makes sense. But I think one without the other makes no sense.
But at this point, Wales has dropped to 12th in the world ranking. Anybody that they play against in the top 10, they're going to struggle against. Purely statistically, right? So regardless if they stay in the Six Nations and just are the whipping boys for the next however many years, or they play in the next league.
Exactly.
Like, aren't they already dead in the water?
Well, that's it also, and that's what Maxi said. He says they should be scheduling games against the teams, like teams that are on their level, and this way that is done. And I would honestly say, if you're going to do that in the Northern Hemisphere, do it in the Southern Hemisphere too.
Absolutely, I agree.
Go ahead, put Japan, Tonga, Samoa, Fiji, whoever else feels like entering a similar tournament to the Rugby Championship. Put them in a competition together, and let's make a relegation spot. And
it doesn't necessarily have to be an immediate relegation spot. It can be a playoff relegation
exactly.
spot.
Yeah. Definitely. And that's always been my criticism of world rugby, because ever since I've watched rugby, which has been for most of my life, it's always been the same teams. There's been no emergence. If you compare cricket, for example, there's been the emergence of countries like Afghanistan and Bangladesh. Bangladesh 20 years ago were nowhere to be seen, and now they're one of the test nations. And that continues to happen. There's constantly, Mongolia played in the T20 World Cup, and like there's constantly just countries that kind of pop in and out of international cricket, and particularly with the ability to earn good money playing T20 cricket. As a contract player, that obviously helps it, and we don't really have that format in rugby. You've got sevens, but it's a sport on its own. So I think that's where I see world rugby being able to create proper growth in the sport.
And as you rightly said, those games like your Wales Italy games, they actually mean something, whereas currently, neither of those two teams are going to win the Six Nations. So what are they really playing for? It's almost become a friendly.
And you've got a great opportunity with Portugal, Spain, Romania, Germany, Switzerland, and Georgia. You have Six Nations that are all fielding teams in, and they might get whacked the first 3-4 times they get into the Six Nations.
Yeah.
But it's only going to lead to growth long term.
Yeah. It's the motivation that's there. Yeah.
And again, also, I look at the Rugby Championship and the ability there to maybe try and create relegation. And, you've got the next World Cup coming up in the USA. There is an opportunity there to pull the USA into something against Samoa, Fiji, Tonga, and Japan. And Canada, for example, and do something that is a feeder tournament to the Rugby Championship, and there's enough money in the United States to make it happen. I mean, they've got a full-on professional rugby league that's now funded, and I'm sure one can find broadcasters and people to make a tournament like that possible.
Yeah, I saw an interesting, it was like an Instagram quote from what's his name, Joe Rogan, and he was talking about rugby. He's like, "Man, that is the meanest, brutalest, most entertaining game I've ever seen in my life. But it would never work in America." And the guy that he was talking to was like, "Oh, why? Why do you think that?" He says, "There aren't enough breaks.
Yeah.
When are we supposed to advertise shit?" And that raises an interesting question as to why are we trying to push rugby in America so hard when the barrier to entry is so high there?
I think follow the money. The issue, you have to follow the money and follow the way money moves. If you look at rugby presents a very, very big opportunity because it's one of the least saturated sporting codes with the biggest following. And I think that's why. So exactly what I just criticized about world rugby and not being grown properly worldwide, at the same time presents a very exciting opportunity for investors, because you have a very big, large, concentrated following of people that watch rugby, but it hasn't penetrated the markets so much. And I think that's why that's why it's happening. And I think that's why you're seeing American investment firms enter buy parts of the All Black rugby setup. That's why the Sharks are owned by American investment funds.
Monster Energy, is that American?
Monster Energy is American, yeah.
Because they just bought into the Springboks.
Yeah. So there's yeah, and I think that's why it's happening. And I think, if you look at the way sports structures are in the United States, and also some of our Canadian friends will also probably be able to either correct me or agree with me on this. A lot of the times, if you own one sporting franchise, you own a second.
Right.
So a lot of the NBA owners also own an NFL team or an NHL team or whatever. And the nature of that, I think, leads to them going, okay, well, let's get them under the, you're creating economies of scale. Well, then I'm going to buy an MLS team as well. And if I've got an MLS team, I might as well buy a rugby franchise as well and get in early,
Yeah.
So I think that it is exciting, and let's see how that works. And it can be good, but it can also be very disruptive. To quickly veer off, I know we're on our rugby segment here, but quickly veer off. I was told yesterday by our friend Costa, who's a big basketball fan, that the NBA have now announced that they're going to fund and start their own league in Europe for basketball to rival EuroLeague.
Really?
Yeah. And in that case, a lot of the purists are saying, don't touch our game. Don't fucking touch our game, because the EuroLeague has built something really impressive.
Absolutely, yeah.
But all those franchise owners in the States that make shit tons of money off their NBA franchises want in on the action, and EuroLeague has basically said no. So now they're going their own route, and there is talk of them forming their own team in Berlin in addition to the Alba.
Okay.
And building their own arena.
Unreal.
So that's why I think you'll see rugby grow. I don't know in which direction it'll grow. I don't know if it'll be a traditionalist, purist direction that we've put on the table with relegation and promotion, and it could be completely far out, and we could have completely, we could have
conferences,
and we could have a lot of the South African players just being drawn to the money in the States.
Yeah.
At some point in 10 years, but we'll have to see.
The future of rugby is very interesting. I think we can end this podcast with a little foresight to the upcoming fixtures for the Six Nations. Let me just scroll down.
Ah, yes.
Ooh, that's too much. So, this next weekend, we have got the very entertaining Wales versus Ireland game. Who's going to win that one, Dom?
It'll be Ireland, but I won't be surprised if Wales play a very managed performance full of heart in front of their home fans with a new coach.
Do you think there's going to be a new coach bounce like you talk about in football?
Yeah, I think so, but I don't think they can beat Ireland. But I think you'll see a heartening performance. I think, and I hope it for the Welsh as well. I hope that they don't get completely clubbed. Having said that, Ireland don't strike. Ireland aren't a team that run riot, in my opinion. Generally speaking, I think they're a great side, but I don't, when South Africa or the All Blacks really get going, we can often beat teams by 40, 50 points.
Right.
I don't know if Ireland will do that. I still expect Ireland to win comfortably, but I think the Welsh will
have a bit of fight in there.
Yeah, I think so. And maybe manage the game better, because I think that's been their issue. They've just not shown up.
The headline game of this weekend is going to be the game of Scotland versus the Anglican English.
Yeah, that's in Murrayfield, actually.
At Murrayfield.
Yeah. A lot of people, it would be cool if Scotland win this and blow this whole thing wide open again, or even further. Yeah. Obviously, that'll completely play into the hands of Ireland if Scotland can beat the English.
Sure. Do the English take a lot of motivation from the win against France?
100%. And I think what it does is any doubt, at least for now, in Borthwick's approach to the game, which I criticize, this weird, disruptive, defensive kind of approach, any doubts around that have disappeared now, for now. And maybe you see that kind of just really come to the fore, and the English just continue to just polish this way of playing that Borthwick has developed.
The French have quite a strong kicking game, hence why they had Finn Smith at fly half and they had Marcus Smith at fullback so that they could counter that kicking a bit. Do you think they're going to go with the same setup against Scotland who doesn't kick nearly as much?
I think you'd be an idiot for changing anything if you're Borthwick after beating the French. I think you'd be an idiot because the biggest criticism is that the English have lacked any sort of momentum, I think. They've had great performances, but, they lost to England. They lost to Australia. They got beaten by us. So there's no momentum. So now you've beaten the French, who were firm favourites. Keep the momentum, keep the same setup, beat Scotland. And then you go to your last game of the tournament is then against who? Italy, I think. Or they've got 2 more games after that. Because England play the top 3 sides in the first 3 games.
Yeah.
So they've got Wales and Italy left. They've done the job against Scotland and Ireland. Scotland and France, if they win this weekend. Then you essentially send Ireland to France saying, you want to win the Six Nations, you got to beat the French.
Yeah.
And that's why I think
they're not going to take that lying down.
Yeah, and I think that's why you've got to just I think you'd be dumb to change anything against the Scottish, to be honest.
Do you think the Scots have a chance? Do you think they riled themselves up over the last 2 weeks?
No. I say that only because I thought the Scots would be better against Ireland. And I just think they weren't good at all. And obviously they got a couple of the injuries and HIAs and what. But I just think, I don't know. I struggle to believe the Scots believe they have a chance. This fighting edge, we spoke about it. I feel like the Scots are too nice at times.
Do you think that's something that comes down to Townsend, maybe not being the right guy for the job in terms of, because the Scots, you look at Glasgow, you look at Edinburgh, they've got some incredible players. You would think they've got a world-class team on their hands to, really rival anybody really in the Six Nations.
This is going to be quite controversial, but I sometimes do ask myself if the makeup of their team doesn't hurt them with the nationalities.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly believe, you look, and I'm not just talking about the South Africans, I'm talking about Tuipulotu, who's not Scottish. He's Scottish, but I ask myself, and this sounds very it doesn't sound globalist at all, it sounds quite nationalist, but I do ask myself sometimes, if you've got 15 players on the pitch and 7 of them, only converted to Scotland later in life, do those guys fight for that jersey and fight for their country the same way as the guys that are born in Scotland and are Scottish through and through? It's a bit of a devil's advocate question. And again, it's going to probably be controversial. And who am I to say? And I know absolutely fuck all. So I'm not in that dressing room. But I do sometimes wonder.
There's a lot of debate that goes around, do you have the right coaches to motivate those nationalities? And as you say, you've got a mixed bag of nationalities there. So have you got a coach who's able to motivate all of them equally?
And that's actually, that's a better point. That's a better point than, I think it's such a no-brainer that if you're in a room full of purely Scottish people, the one thing that binds you as Scottish people is that you're Scottish and you're Scottish through and through, and that's an easy sell. But that's not the case in this dressing room. And then you have to find the right person to unlock this multitude of people. And I think that's where Rusty's really good at. Obviously, he chose South Africa and them all being South African as a way to drive the players, but such a diverse team of players from different backgrounds, etc., etc. Again, it's a devil's advocate question, and it's maybe a bit of a stupid question in that sense because I can't answer it, and maybe it's nothing. But I do ask myself sometimes if can Duan van der Merwe feel about the English what a Finn Russell feels about the English?
Right.
And I think...
him as an Afrikaner, probably.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe that wasn't the best example, but...
Can a Tuipulotu.
Yeah, yeah. And how do you get them to feel that?
Yeah.
That's kind of my wonder.
Do you think the likes of a Franco Smith would be a better head coach, considering the success that he's had with Glasgow and being part of the bulk of the players that have come from that?
Yeah, maybe, but as a South African, I don't know if I'd ever want a coach that's not South African. You know what I mean? And And that's why I find it hard for the Scots to choose a coach that's not Scottish, because I think they have good enough Scottish coaches to do the job.
But I mean, those European countries, they often have coaches that are not necessarily from.
Sure. But I think Scotland are good enough to have a Scottish coach and do better. That's that's what I believe.
'Cause I mean, some of the most successful games for England were under Eddie Jones.
Yeah, he's a lovely person.
Yeah, and he's not English.
No. Yeah, good point. I don't. Maybe. But yeah, I don't know. I think. Let's see.
Yeah. The last game that we have that weekend, or this next weekend, will be Italy against France. It's in Rome, but I think the French should be able to do it.
Yeah, funny enough, there's a part of me that feels like it could be a bit of banana peel only because of the shock French lost to the English. And I think the French will really be kicking themselves. But at the same time, the French know if they beat Italy, that goes straight to that showdown against Ireland, and they still have a chance, and then it's to a certain degree in their own hands. I don't know exactly what the permutations would be. One would have to look, what is it, points difference? Or I think it would come down to bonus points probably.
Well, it would be points.
Yeah.
And then I think it's tries.
Okay. So what France will be looking to do is absolutely hand it to Italy as much as possible. And then see what they can do against Scotland as well. And then go on to that game in Ireland against Ireland.
Nice. Well, on that note, I think we will have to report back next week.
Exactly.
We'll have Maxi joining us for that one.
Yes. And if you've listened to this episode, thank you very much. Please subscribe and follow. And remember, we have 2 more episodes coming out this week. Tomorrow, it'll be football. And the day after, it'll be the leftovers with Maxi and myself. So thank you very much.
Like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And if you've got any qualms about the current format that we're doing, please direct it at dominicneal@gmail.com. He will pass it over to his spam mail.
Yeah. Or if you do send it to exactly that email address, it will go to some other person named Dominic Neal, and and they will be overjoyed with your email. Yes.
But seriously now, if you do have any suggestions or comments, please leave them down below.
There's it.
We appreciate you.
Arrivederci.
Toodaloo.
Bench Opinions. 3 idiots with amateur analysis.